Thank you for having me, Jeff. Michael, admire what you all do. Thank you.
So, Ricardo, I know you got to work both with Bluffton and Findlay on this merger. So maybe let's start there. You got to see them up close. Your newest book is on the topic of what leadership needs to look like when a big, scary change is afoot or should be afoot. What are the leadership characteristics required to get a university to take this sort of action proactively? There's a lurking derivative question, I suppose, of when is the right time to even initiate this, right? Did they get it right? And what are the leadership characteristics really required to get through this?
Well, it's a great question because, frankly, I think Jane and Kathy really have and exemplify some of those leadership characteristics. I really think it takes courage, and so that's the what we call the number 7 or number 1 characteristic. You need to have the courage of your convictions and the courage to actually face what we call ugly news, right? You have to face the facts. So when we talk about leading big, scary change, restructuring, closures, planned closures, of course, mergers, these kind of things, you have to have significant courage. The other thing you have to have, and there's a number of things we talk about in our book, but the other thing you have to have is sort of a willingness to work in ambiguity, to understand that it's not going to be black and white, that in fact you don't know when this is going to happen, that in fact it's actually gray. Lots of higher ed leaders don't like that, right? Most leaders say, I don't want to make a move until it's very clear and I have all the facts. But when you're dealing with big, scary change, it's simply you're never going to have all the facts, right? You're never going to know exactly what happens in the future. So you have to be willing to step into that. The other thing I think as a leader that both Jane and Kathy have exemplified is that they have been able to provide an operational envisioning. It's a term we use to provide a vision, but also to provide sort of the mechanics. How is this going to work?
But obviously, you have boards and others involved, right? A lot of people, besides the president, him or herself, have to be able to see through this ambiguity, right? Because it can't just be the president by themselves, correct?
You're absolutely correct, because in the end, major restructuring of universities belongs to the governing boards. They are the only ones that have the actual authority to get these done. And so when I talk about leaders, there's always one leader that brings the rest. Sometimes it is the president. Sometimes it is the board chair. Sometimes it's the board vice chair. Sometimes it's another member of the board that's willing to bring people together. I've always been asked, how do you start the narrative around this? And I always tell people, one individual at a time. This is not something you present an idea to a whole group and the whole group goes, oh yeah, it sounds like a great idea. No, you actually have to work one individual at a time. Sometimes it's the president who comes in, looks at the book and says, there's no way we're going to be, functioning 24 months from now. Or sometimes the board chair has been working at it and says, you know what, we've been here before. We need to we owe the students and the faculty a plan to think. So anyway, these are people who are leaders. So when I speak of leaders, I'm not just talking about presidents. I'm talking about, obviously, whoever takes charge a little bit of convincing their members one by one, because it takes that